Hello and welcome. My name is Tadej Blažič and I'm a freelance 3D designer from Slovenia. Today we continue our series with animation. I'll show you how to use interesting tricks with noise keyframes, how to create collisions with the wings, and create camera movement with keyframes and markers. So let's get into it. This is where we've left off last time. Now it's time to animate our scene. So we want to make our bee exit the actual beehive hole. We want to select the number of keyframes that we will be using. Usually the way I do it, it's I just look, for example, I'm making 24 frames per second. So if I'm doing a 10-second animation, that's 240 frames. If I divide that by 2, I get 120 frames, which means the animation will last about 5 seconds, which is let's say a good duration for Instagram. Now that we know the number of frames, we can go in the bottom right corner, click on the end and type 120, which means we will have 120 frames full. Before we move any further, we still have our wings not following the body, so we need to take care of that. It will be fairly easy. We just want to take the wings, so shift select the wings, shift select the skeleton, control P, and we can use the bone. So they are parented to the actual bone. Now, however we move the bone, the wings will follow it. We want to reset this position, so we have to go into pose mode, select everything by pressing A twice, then hold Alt and R, and Alt and G. So this is going to reset our little character. Exit object mode, press 1 on the numpad, and let's just reset our wings so they are behaving correctly, like so. They will still follow our character, so no trouble there. And let's go into front view again, press G, X, and let's move our character inside. The character goes out of the hole, sort of pops his head out of the hole, and then just exits it and undulates onwards. We're going to animate the skeleton movement, and it's going to be very easy. We want to go into front mode, press G, move our character outside so we see a bit better what's happening. Let's go into pose mode and just click on the head, press I, and use location rotation. So we're going to put a keyframe there. Click on the back of the bee, press I, location rotation. Now we have these two guys here. We're going to divide our screen again. We're going to choose the graph editor, and in the graph editor click normalize so we see what's happening. Select both by holding shift and then selecting the head and the tail of the bone, and let's go press N in the right screen so we get our curves and modifiers window. Click on the modifiers, and now we want to set up the modifiers, or rather the noise animations. But I won't be using the location, rather I'll be just using the rotation. We just want the shifting type of rotation. So I'm just gonna set a noise. I'll just press play so I can see in real time what's happening to our bee. So we want sort of a ticking type of movement, not too strong, but not too weak. So we want something like that, because the hair will be responding to all of this movement, so we don't want very quick acceleration. Now let's increase the strength on the x-axis, so we'll be turning also on the x-axis, something like that. Let's choose the Z noise, and we also do the Z one. Feel free to test different options for your noise, but we want something like this that's in between the real noise or that a bee would make and the actual animated one. So I'm gonna do the same thing to the head. I'm just gonna move forward. Now that we have the full animation of our bee, we can start moving it inside of our beehive by pressing X so that we can see that it fits snugly inside. We will just increase the size of the hive and the collision, so shift select the collision and the hive, press S, and then just increase the size of the whole beehive by, let's say, 1.2. So I'm holding control, dragging the mouse to 1.2. So it looks like this. Now let's animate the bee movement. So we're going to animate the bee entering and exiting our hole. Now we don't want to start here in the middle because the wings will be clipping with our collision. So we want to select a point. Let's go into wireframe by pressing Z, or we can zoom in so we can take a look inside, and we can find a sweet spot where the wings are barely close or barely touching the collision. So this would be a good point. When we have our starting position, we can go into pose mode, turn off this window by dragging it to the right so we can see a bit better what's happening. And now we can start animating and keyframing our location. We want to move, let's say, 15 frames ahead, press G, Y, and then move our B. But we don't want to move it aggressively, so we just want to move it a couple of intervals, then select the back part, and the back part will jump to frame 10, press G, jump to frame 20, and then press G and Y to inset a new keyframe. Now let's scrub the timeline so we can see what's happening. Now you can see that our B, it's moving forward and it's also keeping its noise animation. Now let's go again to the head. It's all a matter of now finding the proper exit, the proper vibe for our little fellow over here. We can also rotate, move it on the X, like he's just popping his head out like so, just checking what's happening. Maybe we can make him turn around like this. So we're going to jump 5 frames ahead, pull to the middle, R, Z, pull to the middle, so it's in a middle position, and then move to 40, X, R7, and rotate it on the Z axis, like so. And now we can see that our little guy pops out, checks the surrounding, then we can copy the actual keyframe, so we want him to return to the middle position. So we just right-click, or rather select the keyframe, Control-C, and now we can move, let's say, to frame 48, Control-V to paste the keyframe, and we have it pasted. So it's going to look like this. When the B is here, we can now decide to move him. So let's select our butt over here. Let's scrub the timeline. Here he is already extending. So we can jump to frame 35, press G, then move to frame 45, press G again, and move it on the Y-axis closer to the exit, like so. So it becomes chunky again. Let's check how this one looks. So we're just going to press play. So he's out. When the butt actually comes to the beginning of the head, now we can basically move the head forward, or rather make it exit the actual beehive, like so. So now that we have this, he's exiting. We can make the butt follow very quickly. And when he's out, like so, let's check the timeline. Here we have a slight clipping with the mesh. So you can just click, drag the keyframe and pull it further. So the further you pull it on the timeline, the slower it's going to get to the middle. And you can just start and scrub the area to control what's happening. So he gets out, he pops, he has that sort of a stretching, popping motion, which is exactly what we want to. And now let's make it just fly away. So we're going to drop down the head, maybe rotate it on the X axis. Let's choose the butt. So let's see what's happening. We can perhaps raise the bottom, then just turn it on the X-axis. So it's like gearing up to fly away. G, Z, move it on the Z-axis, then on the Y-axis, and make sure that the butt is not so far away. And now we can make him fly away a bit faster. So we're just going to move this a bit more aggressively, like so. And then we choose the butt. So the butt follows suit. So let's say at 93, let's move the keyframe GZ and then GY. We can move the butt so it matches the angle of flight of our B. So let's take a look at what we have up until now. Let's press play. So we see our B looking out, exiting, and then flying away, or rather gearing up to fly away. Maybe we can make the butt stay a bit longer, so we can just move the frames to about 90. And let's just scrub the timeline. Maybe it's just a bit too harsh. Let's move it to 85, and let's see what's happening, like so. At this point, the actual butt should already be sort of aligned, so we can just rotate on the X-axis, so we get something like this. And he flies off. The point of this is that you're trying to see, scrub the timeline, check what's happening, see the interaction that you have with your character, so you can decide on which type of course of action you're going to take. Don't complicate too much. You don't need to be extremely precise because a lot of the work is already done by our noise modifier. It gives a lot of visual interest to our bee. So it's like doing half of the work for you. Now we just need to find the sweet spot, make it fly away. So for example, we're just going to choose a point beyond 120. So we're just going to drag it, pull it up even more. So we're going to be very aggressive, move it away, and then match the butt also with the position of the bee, like this. Maybe even more. So we just want the base shape that we had in the beginning. Let's see our animation. We see gearing up and flies away. Now, one thing to keep in mind is we are already starting to think about our camera position. So what we want to do is check where the actual limit of our bee flying away is, because that is going to be our camera cutoff. First of all, we need to make our wings not clip with the collision plane. So we're going to go into object mode, select our wings. Now we have to modify them. Now, one way of doing this is we will be using a cloth simulation. So I'm going to choose one of the wings and I'm going to apply the subdivision. Now, if I go into tab mode, you can see that most of the edges and faces are already selected for me. And that's perfect because those will be used to create the actual pin group for our cloth. Now, if you don't know what I mean, you'll see it in a second. Let's go into our object data properties and let's choose the vertex group. Let's add a new one and we're going to name this group wing. Press assign, which means that it's going to assign all of these vertices to this group. Now let's exit our edit mode and let's go into our physics properties. And let's click on cloth. When we click on this and when we start, you'll just see the wing fall down, which is not a huge issue. You need to find the shape menu, search for pin group, click on it, and then select wing. We still have an issue. The wing just collapses into itself. That's because we need to take care of a couple of things. First of all, we're going to click on internal springs, which means that this is going to try and hold the structure of the wing to a specific stiffness or tension that we set. In our case, we'll leave the diversion at 45. We don't need to create the max spring creation length. The tension, however, we will put to 50, which is quite a lot. We will click on pressure and set the pressure to 1. This is sort of an inflation force, so how much you can inflate the object, which is very useful for these situations. In the collisions, which is under our shape, we will choose the self-collisions and we'll set the self-collisions to about 0.4. Now, let's take a look at what happens to our wing when we do this. You can see that the wing actually tries to recreate itself when it passes through our collision. Now, we need to fine-tune this either with the distance of the self-collision, because that means that the two meshes that are on each side will try and evade the collision between themselves. You can also increase the quality a bit, so we have a better reproduction of the collision, like so. And you can see that the wings actually fold into each other and they just exit and reset themselves. We can go into the modifiers tab and add a subdivision surface again, so we can see just a bit better what's happening. We can keep the viewport at 1, it's going to be enough. So we can see that we have a nice sort of collision. So it's a nice squeezing action. We can still take care of a couple of things. Maybe we can increase the tension or the stiffness. But I think in our case, if we increase the pressure to about 2, I think that should take care of any problems like that. And it just resets itself. Now we have to repeat the same process on the other wing. So I have to apply the subdivision and everything, but I'll just fast forward through this part. Our final result looks like this. So the wings fold inside and they stretch out, and when he flies, they just follow it. Perfect. Check our hair dynamics. So we're going to choose our bee. We're going to go into our particle properties, turn on our monitor so we can see what's happening. Let's Control S save our project. And now let's bake our dynamics. But before we do that, we need to change the end to 120. So this means it's going to bake from 1 to 120 frames. Let's click bake and let's see what happens. Now let's try, press play, and you can see we have a couple of issues. Now, one problem is that when our little guy turns very strongly either or other way, some of the hairs actually clip through the body. Now, how can we solve that? Fairly easily. Let's just return to frame number 1, delete our bake. Now let's try increasing the stiffness drastically. Let's say to about 8. Yes. So rebake your model, press play, and let's see what happens when it's exiting and going through. This is looking okay. Let's see at this part. So what we are looking for is we don't want any type of clipping. We want it to be very soft but not clip through our object, so our B object. So it still has that fluffy recoil, but it's not clipping through anything. We also have a clean interaction with our collision object. Perfect. Now let's try and delete our bake, set the end to 120, Control S and bake again. Okay, let's replay our animation. Now we shouldn't have any issues with acceleration or any issues with any sort of clipping here. Let's just scrub very slowly. So here we have a very strong type of acceleration. Here he is returning back. Here he is exiting. So we can see that the hair is holding up nicely. It's behaving as a fluffy object. And now when he flies off, it's also good. So this is going to be essentially it for the animation portion of our video. Now let's start and set up a couple of cameras. So we're going to go Shift S World Origin, so cursor to World Origin, because we will be setting and choosing our camera points. When you're thinking about creating camera views and creating any type of framing for these short loops, I suggest the following. Try to find the points where you can easily reloop your animation. So basically at this point the B already accelerates and flies off. So I think about here it's a good point where we can stop our camera and return it to its initial position. Now let's see, in this position it's kind of okay. So we want to have a couple of frames of the camera when it's like this. It just looks at the B when it pops out. And then a larger portion is going to be when the bee actually exits and looks around and starts to gear up for takeoff. So let's say from frame 30 to frame 70 or maybe even 80, which means that we have to choose a couple of different markers, or rather a couple of different camera angles. We'll first begin with our main one. Now let's go into front view and let's put a new camera in our scene. Control Shift A, camera. So it's there. Now to put our camera where we are looking at, Control Alt 0, and that's going to position the camera into your view. So this is what we will be seeing. Now we can actually zoom in. So if you go into your camera properties, or rather object data properties, you can select the amount of focal length, and then you can also move it on the y-axis to better catch your B. What I suggest in these cases, first things first, viewport display, you have to check limits and the composition guides. I usually go with thirds, so I just pick the thirds and then I try to position my camera so it catches the thirds. So in this case, I'm looking for the hole to be in between the two thirds. For example, we will be doing this for an Instagram post, so we have to change a couple of things first before we go any further. You want to go to your output properties, and here you can choose the resolution. If you click on it and just type 180 by 180, which is a square resolution that's usually very useful for Instagram, you have a much larger area that the camera covers. So in this case, we can possibly go even further in, so we can really get like that nice curvature of our beehive. Now let's just scrub the timeline so we see how our bee looks like. So it's exiting, gearing up, and going upwards. So at this point, it would be a good point to switch the camera to another angle. I'm going to set a marker here. I'm going to press M, which is going to set one marker. And I'm going to scrub to the beginning to about frame, let's say 25, which is going to be about a second. And I'm going to press M also there. So we have two markers, and we will assign these cameras accordingly. So one way of doing that is you choose your camera, or rather select your camera, you hover over your marker and press Ctrl B. And you can see that it changed to camera. So that means that the camera is going to capture everything that is in this interval. And if you have another camera, you can pair it to here, and this camera is just going to continue. That's the way you can set different angles for your camera. Now that we know that, let's just go in even further. So we are really close to our little guy over here, so we can see all of the beautiful hair that we've done. And when it starts to fly off, we can actually change the angle. We're going to shift back. Now let's put a marker there. We're going to Shift A, add another camera. And now with that camera selected, so make sure that it's selected, hover over your frame and press Ctrl B. Now if you press 0 and return into your camera view, you can see that it's returning to another one. If you scrub the timeline, you can see that the camera is switching positions, or rather we are switching camera views. Now let's set up this camera. We want to find sort of an angle where the bee is hidden and we can see the beehive, maybe a position like this. Ctrl-Alt-0 for positioning. Don't forget about the thirds and about the limits. The limits, I'll tell you, are a very useful trick for later on. When we have our thirds, let's just position the camera closer so it's kind of hiding quite a bit of our environment. Let's position it closer. Maybe we can move it slightly to the right. And now it's a good time to decide if you want to have the hole in the center, or if you want to have it outside of your thirds, or if you want to have a huge space in between those. Whatever works for you, you can choose whatever type of framing you want. Now let's press play, and you can see that we just have a brief view of our bee exiting. We have the main one here, and then exits back. The cameras are a bit stationary and they're not very interesting. So we can change that by pressing the auto keying button. Press G to put in your keyframe, and let's move to frame number 24 in our case. And let's just press G again, move ever so slightly on the Y-axis, press R, Z, and then again move it slightly. Because you'll see that even with these very small increments, the camera moves quite drastically. When you're done, just press, or rather select the keyframe and move it over to the other camera. Now if you press, you have a nice fluid motion. Otherwise, the camera would stop right at that frame and you would have a very jagged frame. This one is also good, but let's put a bit of variety in this camera. So what we're going to do, press G, and now we can use the same trick that we used for our bee. Let's expand our screen again, choose the graph editor, press N, go under modifiers, and on the left, on the camera, choose, for example, Z location. Add the modifier, the noise modifier. Let's normalize, so we have all of these in the middle. And let's just put the strength to very low and the scale to very large. So the motion is not going to be as strong. Let's just play so we can see what's happening. Perfect. Now we can add just a bit of Y location. We're doing again the same thing. Just put in the strength, lower it down so it's not too jagged, increase the scale. Same with the X location, noise, scale, decrease the strength. Like that. And we have sort of a moving type of camera. Perfect. So we have this moving camera, and now we just need our last frame. One good idea, or one really nice idea, could be that we have it coming towards us. So we have our little bee coming towards us, like so, and basically clipping into a camera. And then we just reset at the beginning. So now we need to position our camera, Shift A, camera, and with the camera selected, click on the marker, so the final marker, Control B, and parent that camera. Press Ctrl-Alt-0 to center your camera. Let's just go into our camera view and let's see what's happening. So we want our camera to be much lower, so it's going to be here. Maybe we can make it just clip with our character. So we just disappear. let's say about here. Let's try it. So the camera is looking down and our bee is coming up. However, the angle is a bit awkward. So let's just move our camera backwards. We can again choose the thirds and the limits to see how our shot is working. And when we have that, press the Auto Keying button, press G. So we set the keyframe for our camera. And now let's look at the point where we want our camera to disappear. So at about frame 120. GY and then move it inside of the bee. Now let's press play and see how that looks. And you can see that we actually catch the bee exiting. He turns and flies towards us. And that's going to be it for our animation of the cameras, for our character animation, and for our wings. Join us in the next part of the video where we create materials for our objects, where we light our scene and start rendering. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next one.